Wait, can you get to the other side really quick? I'm just trying to see if I can follow you.
Yeah, it
Oh,
will
it
only
does.
show you if you go on that side and it will cover the.
Okay. So I guess, are you okay with staying there for now and then we'll switch after that? Okay. Well, it's 10, so I guess we'll just get started. Okay. I'll sit. And then let me know.
Okay, cool. So we're doing female presence in Southeast Asian government. Okay, so I'm just going to start off with kind of like a broader overview and then give some like examples in like throughout history. So in pre-colonial South Asia, so like in the 15th century, women in the archipelagos, which is like current day Philippines, often fulfilled the role of a datu, which basically was like they were the ruler of a certain group of indigenous people, and like the secession of the rule also didn't bypass like a woman for like a son, like is often done in like Western monarchies, I guess. And yeah, the country had so many female rulers that was actually given the nickname of the Queen Country of Ancient Asia. And then in countries like Malay and Thailand, women were often rulers and military commanders. And then another example in Sumatra, K. Malayati was the first recorded officially appointed female admiral in the history of the world. And she actually led the resistance against the Portuguese and Dutch colonists in the area. Yeah. Okay, so just an example of another female ruler is Kali Yamat, and she ruled from 1549 to 79, and she was the queen of Jepara, which is Java's north coast in today's Indonesia, and she was renowned for her naval attacks and expeditions against the Portuguese who were occupying Malay at the time, and she was also known for expanding the trade of her country. Yeah, and then the Portuguese actually named her the Brave Woman because of her military expeditions and stuff, and she owned the 4 port cities that became Java's trading centers. And one of the like main, I guess, themes that kind of came up throughout my research was that there was like kind of a pattern of women going into power and then their countries reaching like a high point of economic prosperity and a high point of like trading from like before. So I thought that was really cool. Okay. Another example is Diane Kalagintan, and she ruled through the 13th and 14th century. They're not really sure the dates. So that was like also one thing that I came about in my research. Like a lot of these women that we're learning about, like there wasn't that much information left about them, and it was kind of left up to like what did when these countries were colonized, what information was also like taken back to Western countries with them is kind of like what we have left. So that definitely made it a little bit difficult. But anyways, she was the queen of Pasig, Tondan, and Namayan, which is in modern day Philippines. And she was one of the only female rulers pre-Spanish colonization of the Philippines. And just like the woman we talked about before, she also ushered in the golden age of her country and brought a lot of economic prosperity after her rule. And then her 2 daughters also co-ruled different kingdoms after her rule. Yeah. Okay. And another example were the female rulers of Aceh. And so the first one is Taj ul Alam Safia Tunisia, and she was the first female ruler, and she ruled for 35 years, starting in 1640, and she had the longest rule, so there's a lot more information about her than about the other women. But she protected Aceh from falling to Dutch colonizers and losing their trade to them, which included like the Dutch were trying to colonize the tin production of Aceh and also like trying to profit off of elephant trade, and she made sure that didn't happen and also prevented losing any land to the colonizers. And she also set up a special army of women and appointed women to the court of justice. And then her rule was succeeded by 3 other female rulers until 1699, and they're like listed right there. Yeah. And then one other example is someone that we learned a lot about in class already, but just as a reminder, so Kartini was born to a noble family in Java, and she attended Dutch school at the age of 6. once she reached like adolescence age, she was sent to isolation, but she still like wrote letters to her schoolmates, like writing about her situation and kind of the gender inequality she was facing. And then she eventually opened the first school, Indonesian primary school for girls that did not discriminate based on their social status, because like she was able to attend like a Western education style because of the status she was born into. And yeah, so today in Indonesia, like women still celebrate, or people I guess in general, Kartini Day, and it's celebrated on April 21st, which was her birthday. And then this is like an example of like the outfit that women wear on that day, and it's called a pakaian adat tradisional. And then they have like a lot of traditions like lomba memasak, which is like mother-daughter cooking competitions like in their villages and stuff like that. And then I have like a video that goes more in depth to some of these women, but we can like come back to this if we have more time.
All right, one of the countries we wanted to focus on a bit more heavily is Vietnam. So first I want to talk about pre-colonial Vietnam. So historically, women in pre-colonial Vietnam were often delegated to more domestic roles, and we don't see too much evidence of them being formally involved in politics or other forms of government. If they did wield political influence, generally it was through influence over their consorts or other family members, such as their son. So there's a couple exceptions. So I thought this one was really cool. The lady Tru Thi Trinh. She was referred to as the Vietnamese Joan of Arc. So she led a rebellion against the Wu dynasty during attempted Chinese occupation of Vietnam in the 3rd century, and that actually led to the establishment of her own kingdom for a brief period of time. So there's some other exceptions, including scholars from the Li dynasty. So they ruled from the 9th century to the 11th century, I believe from 1099 to 1125. And they gained notable amounts of influence and recognition through intellectual achievements. For example, poetry by the scholars from the Li dynasty was very famous. And then moving into colonial periods. So during French occupation of Vietnam, women still played little to no active role in government. Positions of power were usually reserved for men, and the ones that women were allowed to work in were generally lower level civil servants. Nothing that really had any place in like higher formal politics. But as discontent with French occupation grew, that obviously led to the Vietnam War. And during the Vietnam War, women were integral to many of the groups that led the resistance, including the Viet Minh, the one famously founded by Ho Chi Minh. So women served in all sorts of positions in the Viet Minh, and after occupation, a lot of them continued in leadership roles throughout the end of the Vietnam War. And then we have post-colonial Vietnam to modern-day Vietnam, the modern-day Vietnamese government. So the end of the colonial period in Vietnamese histories, we see like a lot more participation by women in government. For example, here's some famous women in Vietnamese politics. You have Minister Nguyen Thi Dinh. She rose to power during the Vietnam War, and she served as various roles, such as Minister of Justice for the Provisional and Revolutionary Government of the Republic of South Vietnam. You have Nguyen Thi Binh. She served as the Vice President of Vietnam from 1992 to 2002. So she's famous in Vietnamese history for being the first woman to serve as a senior governmental official. Some of the policies during her time greatly improved Vietnam's economy, and she also played a large part in pushing forward the social changes that helped women continue to stay in government. There's also Nguyen Thi Kim Nam. She served as the chair of the National Assembly from 2016 to 2021. During that time, she made lots of waves in her effort to improve Vietnam's economy. In addition, she also played a part in social reform, especially related to the rights of women. And in modern day Vietnam, the trend of women in government is currently rising. It was up about 3% from 2020 to 2021. And as of 2021, 30.26% of the chairs in the national parliament were occupied by women.
Okay, so
Audrey, do you
can
want
you
to?
hear me?
Yeah. Let me move this up.
Okay.
Do you want to like introduce yourself because you're remote?
Oh yeah. So I'm Audrey. I'm going to be presenting here through Zoom. Yeah. Okay, so I'll be introducing the presence of females in Singapore's government, starting off in 1959 of Singapore, after the Centre-Right People's Action Party won the election for a new legislative assembly. Lee Kuan Yew, the party's leader, became the first Prime Minister of Singapore and obtained complete sovereignty from British rule and abolished communist policies, which all in all helped Singapore develop further economically and socially at a faster pace than ever. So when the PAP was established, Singapore's government was under an authoritarian nature of rule. So it was clearly a patriarchal state with rules and societal constructs that correspond to the nation, to the system of the nation. So it's hard to think that the situation would be any different from like a strict conservative essence of policies and norms in Singapore. However, the country has come a long way and strayed away from its history of a strong conservative and patriarchal rule, and women's presence and involvement in society and the government is proof. Next slide, please. So looking at that figure, which shows us the positions occupied by women in national legislatures, or in Singapore's case is its parliament of 105 members. Singapore is only 0.29 away from the country with the highest proportion of positions held by women, which is New Zealand, and it ranks at number 12 in the entire world. So considering the history of Singapore's authoritarian state led by like a center-right dictatorship, as they called it, Singapore's growth and gender equality in terms of the opportunities for women and empowerment of their rights has improved at a steady pace till present day. And that starts in 1960, basically, when women in Singapore received an increase in opportunities to participate and gain more freedoms in accessing education, jobs, and health services. And as expected, women's presence in the Singaporean government has also increased alongside their growth in society. Next slide, please. So the first woman who made a very significant contribution to Singapore's governance is Chan Choi Siong. After her death in 1989, she is still honored through the Singapore Council of Women's Organizations and the Women's Hall of Fame. And most importantly, she was one of the first women among 4 to be elected into Singapore's parliament in 1959. She was only, I think, 23 years old when she joined Lee Kuan Yew's People's Action Party. And before the improvements of women's opportunities that really only started to occur in the year 1960, many were denied the right to an education. Their husbands could have multiple wives, and they weren't accepted by society as workers who should be able to get a job and contribute to the economy. So Chan Choi Siong wanted to put a stop to the inequality, and so she lobbied for women's rights as she rose to a member of the parliament. Chan campaigned for the drafting and passing of the Women's Charter, which is probably one of the most significant achievements that she has made and that Singapore has made towards gender equality. It is an act with the aim of protecting women and helping them gain greater legal equality by prohibiting polygamy in civil marriages with legislating monogamy. So the male-dominated assembly was obviously opposed to Chan's calling to the Women's Charter, so it was really not an easy feat for her. But with the help of one of the members of parliament, the Minister of Law, who had sympathy for women's situation, the act was passed and enacted in 1961. So what Chan achieved through this act is essentially putting men and women on equal footing in front of the law. Chan's legacy also does not end there. She also formed women's subcommittees in the People's Action Party, giving women in politics a community for advocation and belonging, and assembled the Women's League of the PAP, which not only helped pass the Charter Act, but gave women of Singapore a hope for equality and improvement. The Women's League she created then grew to become the Women's Wing in the PAP of present day, which continues to empower women in Singapore to be key players in politics, the economy, and other initiatives such as uplifting underprivileged women. So with women being allowed to vote by the time that Chan was elected into parliament, a majority of the votes back then were able to be secured by the PAP due to women voters' trust in Chan's values. Chan also, she basically paved the way for women in Singaporean government and made critical improvements for women's equality in legislation and the government itself. So she's an important figure to remember when we talk about women's presence, and a big reason why women's presence and rights in Singapore has grown steadily to the level it sits today. For example, seen in the chart shown just now. Next slide, please. So there are currently 27 elected members of parliament who are women out of 93 total elected members, which is 29% of the total members. And not only that, there are women taking part in higher positions as ministers. There are 3 full ministers, 2 senior ministers of state, 3 ministers of state, and a parliamentary secretary, who all take on important roles to help stand for their purposes and keep making positive changes in the government in women's favor. For example, we have Gan Xiao Huang, part of the PAP, and she is the Minister of State for Education and Manpower. And before she even entered politics, she made the achievement of being the first woman to be appointed a title of general in the Singapore Armed Forces, becoming an inspiration for women and their existence in the army. So what Gan Xiao Huang made even more achievements as she took on the role of minister, such as working with local schools to advocate for climate action, with goals of making 30% of schools carbon neutral by 2030. So overall, Singapore has a pretty strong presence of females in government, and these were just 2 out of many examples of impactful women in parliament. And hopefully with this, the country will keep up an increase in female presence in politics. Yeah.
Apparently, I only have 10 more minutes of this Zoom meeting. I didn't know that now you had to pay. So if it gets disconnected, we'll just do another one for the question and answer section. So we'll figure that out. Because apparently it's going to end. So we'll text you if you get kicked out.
Okay.
It's not me,
Oh,
it's
Okay.
capitalism, I guess. Anyways. That's so weird. Why did they? Anyways, that's a different conversation. Now we are going to move over to Thailand, and I just wanted to take you through some of the important women figures in government that I discovered, starting with Orapin Chayakam. She is the first recorded woman to be elected and hold office in the Parliament of Thailand by becoming a member of the House of Representatives on June 5th, 1949. Not much else is really known. I was able to find her picture, and I found this really cool article that, I mean, it doesn't talk too much about her because there's not that much information, but if you guys are interested or we have time, there's a lot more women that are talked about in the article. And now, this is kind of a long story. I will try to condense it as much as I can, but there's a lot to it. We move on to Yingluck Shinawatra, who was the first woman to hold the position of Prime Minister. The story goes, as I learned, that she's actually the youngest sister of a former Prime Minister, Thaksin Shinawatra. and he is one of the founders of the Thai Rock Thai Party. He was actually really well liked by the people, but then he decided to sell his family's corporation for almost $2 billion, and the people were very upset by this. It was like a tax-free sell. A lot happened, so then people were very upset, and then it caused a lot of chaos. So then the military stepped in 2006 to force him out of office, and in 2007 he was convicted for corruption charges, which led him to flee. And then, yeah, he was like convicted, and then he left, and he kind of came back, but then he left again because they wanted to put him in jail. It was a whole situation. So then she runs for prime minister, she gets elected, but then in 2013 she attempts to grant amnesty to people involved in these tensions, which include her brother. So a lot of people were very upset about this. They did not want that to happen. A lot of protests broke out again, and so she was driven out of office and also charged with corruption. I don't want to say interesting, but I guess I'll say interesting thing that happened is that because of the protest in 2014, the military stepped in again with another coup spearheaded by General Prayut Chan-o-cha, and he imposed martial law nationwide that would last for the next 5 years. So this actually just ended. And again, if we have time, I found this really cool article that not only has journalists and people in the government, they also interview Yingluck, and she kind of talks about her experience and what happened, and not just to her, but then later in the country. So the reason why I said that I found it interesting is because when I was first looking into all of this, I found this nice little graph that kind of shows you this decline in 2014, and I was very confused by it. But in 2014 was when the military coup happened, and basically the general took over the government, and he was the one who was appointing everybody in the government, which is why you see this decline. And then once it ended, you kind of see this kind of huge rise, but it's really not that big. It just went back to how it was before. It just feels like this massive thing because of everything that happened. So we move on to Sudarat Keyugatham, I hope I said that right, who is actually one of the co-founders of the before-mentioned Thai Rock Thai Party. She held office before 2019. She was Minister of Public Health, and then she was Minister of Agriculture and Cooperatives, but then she lost her position because of the first coup that happened. And she was banned from political activities, but she returned to politics in 2019 as a prime ministerial candidate. She did not win, but I still think it's kind of interesting that she ran. And then this leads us to the most recent woman that I could find, Trinuk Tientong, who is the first woman to serve as Minister of Education. She was appointed in 2021, and I guess the most interesting thing here is that she actually just did this not even 2 months ago, January 16th of this year. She signed an order canceling the Education Ministry's 2020 regulation on student hairstyles, which basically just means that now every school can choose what to do about student hairstyles. This is kind of debated. A lot of people love this decision, a lot of people hate it. They think that schools are going to just crack down on the students and be more severe than they were before. There's another really cool article. It's short, but it kind of talks about it. And I thought it was an interesting note to end on because this is really recent, like not even 2 months ago. And she got here just in time.
Where's Professor? Hi. Sorry. I had a lot of work for this. Oh, Sri Lanka.
Yeah, she got here just in time for her part.
Hi guys. So I'm going to be talking about the females in Sri Lanka, and this is the beautiful country of Sri Lanka. The whole country it's smaller than the whole California, so I don't know if much people know about it. How many people have heard of Sri Lanka before? Okay, good. Next, please. yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful country with a beautiful nature and such amazing people. So, yes, please. The reason I chose this country was because the first female prime minister in the whole world was from Sri Lanka, and her name was Simavo. So she became prime minister after her husband died. He was a prime minister too. So I was reading her story. It was really, really fascinating. She would never think about having to do anything with politics. But then after her husband and then like the people from his husband party convinced him to carry on his husband's path, she thought it's her duty to move on with that, and then she became the first female prime minister in the world. And if you want to read her story, she's amazing. Like, I've seen some of her interviews. Like, her personality was like totally not what I thought she would be. She was very shy, very calm, and then like there are stories of her that she would actually never get mad, or like she would never lose her temper. She would get angry, but in a very, very calm way. Like, she would make her points straightforward, but then she wouldn't lose her temper. I thought it was beautiful. And she became the prime minister like 3 times in a row. She was elected. So that was her. And then I want to talk about the Sri Lankan woman in general. So my boyfriend is from Sri Lanka. So I had him as a source, and then I also did some Google search, which the things that he told me versus the things that Google said was completely different, because in Google it says most female women are responsible for cooking, cleaning, and raising kids. But then the stories he told me, he said, when you go to Sri Lanka, women work more than men, even. He said like more than 50%, like the majority of people who work are actually women. And then, so he kept telling me about like how powerful women are. And then, so our relationship, like I kind of wanted to add like a personal life story in this. So I'm Persian, he's Sri Lankan, I'm Middle Eastern, he's Southeast Asian, and our culture is completely different. So in my culture, men are like dominated, and apparently in his culture, because of like also both religion and then the way they find woman as the main force of the household, and then she's the queen of everything. So it was kind of like quite a challenge of us finding a balance, because I always thought he has to lead like the relationship, and then he thought I have to lead the relationship. So there would be a point like we both like step back and we wouldn't know what to do until like we, found the middle point, like the sweet spot. It's quite interesting on that. Anyone has any questions? Sorry if I was late. Let's move to Nepal.
Okay. I'm going to talk about Nepal and the female presence and the government. So, Queen Rajendra Raja Lakshmi Devi was the first Nepal's queen, and after her husband passed away, she was the regent of her minority's son, and she ruled for 8 years. And she was recognized for her courageous role because under her military leadership, she was able to take over the 3 districts of Nepal, and also she has promoted the education, especially the girls' education, and she also encouraged for the growth of arts and literature. And she is considered as the most influential woman of Nepal history. And she gave the important contributions on the unification of modern Nepal.
Okay, I was a little early.
Okay, so another girl, another woman, she is called as she was also one influential woman. she organized protests against the discriminatory practice, demanding for good governance, and she also she gave a voice to voiceless women to fight against the women discrimination and the suppression. She also demanded for the respect of women in social and political participation. She was arrested and went for jail for her political beliefs. And she became a representative or motivation for the women to fight against the government for the oppression. She created first organization known as Women's Community in 1974, which gave opportunity for women education. Okay, so Vidya Devi Bhandari was elected as the first woman president of Nepal, and she also served as Ministry of Environment and Population in 1997, also Minister of Defense from 2010 to 2012, and she has proposed for Parliament for the 33% reservation for women in all sectors of governance, which became the Constitution in 2016. She has constantly working on ensuring the women's rights and raising her voice against the women discrimination and oppression. So, yes, the women presence in government has gradually increased in Nepal, but still there is not equal opportunity between male and female, and like political party has given 33% of parliamentary seats to women, but still they are considered as a secondary role in the politics. And also the political leader gave the 33% of parliamentary seat. It's not because of out of respect, it's because of the election commission pressured them to give 33% of parliamentary seat. And also, yes, and even though they had a seat for a parliament, 30% of parliamentary seat, there's no women representation for cabinet. So yes, the women are still facing the discrimination. Even though they are qualified, they are not in the important post of the government. Thank you.
Okay, so we have like some time left. Do you want to go back and like watch some of that video?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
Hold on. Just like all the way at the beginning. I'll find it.
Okay, if you could start at like 4:30. Oh,
Wait, it's
and like
loading.
did the link work? Okay,
It's-
cool.
no, it's loading.
Okay, I was like,
You're good, you're good. The audio might be a problem though.
Shifting their trade to Patani, and as a result, the city grew to become a large
Chill. I don't want to like hurt your guys' ears. Let's see. Let's see if that's
bustling center of approximately 45,000 people. However, despite its growth, Patani was driven by internal political instability in the mid-1500s, with many male heirs being murdered. Palace intrigue in Patani was not just chaotic but also very bloody, and this only finally came to an end around the year 1584 when Raja Ijao, meaning the Green Queen, ascended to the throne after all the other legitimate male heirs had died or had been killed. She was the first of Patani's long line of female rulers, and although she faced opposition to begin with, her long reign from 1584 to 1616 eventually proved to be extremely successful. In fact, European observers of her court reported how much she was loved and highly regarded by her people. Moreover, this occurred at a time time when Patani was enjoying a period of increased economic growth, and as her people benefited from the stability of her reign and the growing wealth of Patani, they began to favor female leadership, which contrasted so sharply with the bloody anarchy before the accession of Raja Ijao. The prevalence of female rule within the Sultanate of Patani for a period of nearly a century and a half remains one of the longest recorded periods of female rule of any state in world history. Patani may seem like the most extreme case of a Southeast Asian kingdom or state being ruled by women during the pre-colonial and early modern period. But many other kingdoms and sultanates across the region also had their own female rulers. And this was especially true across the East Indies, or what are now Indonesia, the Philippines, and the Malay Peninsula, though less so further north in Siam, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. For instance, the Muslim port of Pasay in the bustling Straits of Malacca had two queens in quick succession between 1405 and 1434. In Burma, Queen Shinsabu ruled for 2 decades, between 1453 and 1472. Also, what is now Burma or Myanmar, we have Manisanda, the Mon princess who later became the queen of the kingdom of Bagan. Together with her one true love and third husband, King Kiensita, their empire ushered in an era of peace and prosperity between the different ethnicities. Jepara, on the northern coast of the island of Java, was ruled by Ratu Kalinyamat from around 1549 to 1579. Moreover, the reigns of these queens, like that of the successive queens of Patani, were often the points at which their kingdoms reached their greatest power. For instance, during the period of female rule at Pasay in the early 1400s, the port was the foremost trading center in the Straits of Malacca, and this was before it was taken over by Malacca later in the century. On the other hand, Ratu Kalinyamat turned Jepara into an important trading and political center, and she conducted several military campaigns against the Portuguese at Malacca in the 1500s, and more on this in a future video. And early on the island of Java, the great Majapahit Empire was once effectively ruled by at least 2 queens, the mother and daughter Gayatri Rajapatni and Jagitarja, also known as Tribuana Wijaya Tunggadewi. Although never becoming a queen regnant herself, Gayatri Rajapatni's influence over the politics of the empire transcended from the reign of her husband, the founder of the empire Raden Wijaya, to those of his children, her stepson, Jayanegara, and her own daughter, Jagitarja. As the beloved matriarch of the Singhasari and Majapahit Rajasa dynasty, Gayatri Rajapatni provided her empire with stability in times of chaos, earning her the love and the trust of her people. And after her death, she was enshrined as the Bodhisattva Prajna Paramita, which means the perfection of wisdom. And her daughter Jagitarja would be the first queen regnant of the Majapahit Empire, succeeding the chaotic and notorious reign of her own half-brother Jayanegara. Jagitarja, also known as Tribuana Wijaya Tunggadewi, is best remembered to be the greatest empress of one of the greatest empires in the history of Southeast Asia. Her 2-decade rule expanded their dominions and laid the foundations for the empire's golden age. She was succeeded by her son, the famous Hayamuruk, and similar to her mother, after Tribuana Wijaya Tunggadewi's death, she was deified as Parvati, the Hindu goddess of harmony, power, nourishment, devotion, motherhood, and fertility. On our next video.
Alright. So then we can just use the last bit of time for any questions. Did you guys have? Let me put the
why would you say your group chose to advance in this topic?
Today is the National Women's Day.
Yeah, I think it was also like really interesting just to like learn about, I don't know, I feel like it's a topic that we weren't all super informed about or anything, and especially like, I don't know, in a country where I feel like we don't, or I guess around the world we don't have like enough women in power, so it was really interesting to learn about like the roots of like Southeast Asia and how women were in power, and then like how that has like translated to today.
I also think it was inspiring, I think, for all of us to see, because we may not think about it, like we're just like, oh, well, men are the ones that are in power, and that's kind of how it is. And so to really dive in and see that, although that is very common, there are a lot of women who have paved the way and who have done a lot of good around the world.
want to say that I'm really moved and inspired by all of you. I didn't know what was going to happen today, March 8th, International Women's Day. I didn't know if I should celebrate or not, but now I feel like there's so much to celebrate. You've given me so much hope. And I have 3 questions. You don't have to answer it right away, or all of you have to think about it. One is how, you said a little bit about how it affected you personally in terms of your relationship with your boyfriend, because you're always expecting him to be. But I wonder how it affected all of you personally doing the research. And the second question is to delve more into the relationship between the military, when you have female leaders in the military, like in Singapore when you have a general, or what happens with coups in the military when you have female leaders. And the third question is, are socialist communist governments more inclusive of women, or are they pretty much the same?
I'm gonna give like a statical answer to that. So the way that I think society is built, education and the whole system of like the salary, how much they put worth on how much a person should get paid based on what they do and their education. So even though it was male dominated before, the thing is crazy because like we go to school and then they expect us to like do what they say, do what they want us to do, and then just live the way that they want us to live. So I don't know if you know about this, but women are more agreeable than men. So men tend to like not sit down and then do the work, but then like the girls would actually sit and then like do their homework, and then they're basically more agreeable. And society likes that. So who gets a higher education? If you look at the statics, like I want to go to medical school, and I was like looking at the values of med schools. Like about 54% of med schools are girls. So why is that? Because the girls were able to like sit and study more, even the law school. So the majority of the people who are actually graduating from those schools are women. And why is that? Because they're agreeable. Because they say yes, yes, yes. And then men don't do that. So what's going to happen, and later on, the women are going to be higher educated and they're going to get paid more, and they're going to basically, I don't know, like get the house like, because like, they get paid more than the husband, and then the whole rules are going to change. And I don't think that's okay, right? I don't want to say like men or women should do this or should not do this, but I want to say like we are different. Like I don't think men and women are equal, and I don't think like we're the same creatures, and I don't think it's okay for one to do the job of the other. So I think the best society would be a society that they understand the difference between men and women. I don't think we're equal, and then they give them the jobs that's best to their ability, and then they give women jobs that are best to their ability. So where are we going to go with this? Where are we going to go with this educational system? Where are we going to go with this system in general? It's just something to think about.
I think it's interesting, and I think it also ties back to the presentation on Monday, which is what you guys were talking about. And I think that the way that I see it and the way that I interpret all of this is a very, I don't remember who was the first teacher who brought this up, but like if I see it in terms of like a pendulum, and so the way that it swings. So like at the beginning, it was all the way over here, like men were the ones who were doing everything and had all the power. And then in the search for like equality, we were kind of, I don't think we've ever really gotten to the middle, but I think we've actually skipped the middle and we're kind of over here now. And so it's really interesting, it's really hard, I think, sometimes to be able to find that middle ground of like, yes, we want to support women and we want to make sure that they move forward, but we also don't want to stop thinking about men and like, in terms of like, they are also progressing in terms of accepting toxic masculinity and trying to be in touch with their feelings. And I think that we have to find that balance. And I think it's a very difficult balance to achieve, but I think that's kind of, I'm not sure what would have to happen for us to hit that kind of middle point.
I agree.
So in terms of some personal stuff that I personally like encountered while doing my research for this presentation, I found it great that like there was a lot of, I was like pleasantly surprised by how many examples of women in power and women in government I found when researching the history of Vietnam. I thought it was interesting that, like, for example, in our society in the U.S., we like to hold ourselves as a very progressive, like, place to be, especially compared to other areas of the world. But when you look at it, we found like so many examples. Like, for example, the first female prime minister in the world was from Sri Lanka, and we find like lots of other women in senior governmental positions. Versus in the U.S., we have yet to have had a female president. And so I thought facts like that were interesting. Like I said before, like I thought it was cool like how many examples there were of women in power that there are to celebrate. And in response to the third question that you asked, I personally, from what I saw, I don't think that there is anything intrinsic about like a communist form of government that creates a more inclusive space for the people in power. I think, for example, like how there was an increased presence of women during the communist governments during the Vietnamese War. I think that was born more out of necessity than anything to do with communism, and the needs of the nation were put before the patriarchal traditions that were instilled beforehand. And so I think that's definitely a good thing, but I don't think it was 100% anything to do with the communist nature of the government necessarily.
And kind of going like off what Saketh said, like in my experience researching, I kind of found it honestly like really sad because I was doing more like pre-colonial research, and it was really, really hard to find information on these women, which was like, just sucks because like the information that we do have is basically like a lot of the websites were saying was like what the colonizers were able to take back and like what Western literature kind of continued to study, so we don't have a lot of the information, but it was just like crazy to see how like these kingdoms kind of performed before being colonized, and even like in Iran, like in the Persian Empire, like there were so many women in power, and like in Southeast Asia there were so many women in power. So I just feel like it's definitely like really crazy to think about the contrast between that time and then like even like present day. Yeah.
And I don't know if anyone's taken up the second question either yet. So just to be sure, it was relating to military coups when there are females in power. I did think that was slightly interesting. Like, I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to call it a trend myself, but it did seem like there was an interesting amount of cases where females in power were overthrown by the military. And I do think that is in part to like patriarchal traditions and stuff, like kind of creating like an air of uncomfort when there's a woman in power, and especially in situations like that. And like for example, the lady Tru Thi Thin during the 3rd century in Vietnam was also, I believe, overthrown militarily or through a military coup. And it's not just in like Southeast Asian cultures. You could find like examples of it in the Western world as well. Like, I don't think I have any that comes off the top of my head, but it just seemed familiar. And I think that's my best response to that question.
So if there's like a war or something and there's a military situation, I think I, as a woman, I wouldn't go necessarily like take a gun in my hand and like fight. But then I think, I don't know, to fulfill my role, to help the whatever situation is going on. And if there's a military situation, I think I would rather to choose like to be on the behind of the scene, and then for example help with providing like for the food and then comfort, or if there's anyone who needs their kids to be taken care of, or helping other women to empower their husbands who are at work. But I wouldn't necessarily go and be in the war zone. But I would do not that I think I don't want to be responsible for anything, but I don't think I don't think I'll be presenting my best in the war zone, but I'll be presenting my best in, like, behind the scenes doing women's job. I don't know. That's just my personal thought.
I just want to say I think there's something really ironic about military generals thinking that they can run the government better than the politicians, but I'm just going to leave it at that. I think we're out of time, so.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you so much.